Guys, how are you doing? I am back to continue talking with you about verb phrases in English. And we now know that each sentence is comprised of a subject and a predicate. That is the basic structure of every single sentence in English. And we also know that every subject is always a noun phrase. Every predicate is always a verb phrase. So the structure of every single sentence in English is going to be subject, noun phrase, in other words, verb phrase, predicate, in other words. Those are the same things. So what we want to do today is to talk a little bit about and think about what is happening within the predicate part of the sentence. We will come back to talk about the internal structure of the subject to see what's happening within the subject. For now, however, we're going to be focusing on the predicate, the verb phrase. So what we're going to observe is that we have several distinct types of verb phrases. And we can know what type we have by looking at what is within the predicate. So whatever is there inside the predicate, whatever phrases are there, whatever phrase is there, any material that is there is going to tell us what type of verb phrase we have. So before we think a little bit about how we decide what the complements of the verb are, first consider that for every verb phrase, you're going to have what we call a verb group. So a verb group is just what it sounds like. It's a group of verbs. So for every single sentence, we know that we're going to have at least one verb. If you have one and only one verb in the sentence, you know that that is your main verb. So for example, if you have the sentence, Bill is nice. So we have Bill as the subject, it's the topic of the sentence, it's what the sentence is about, and then we have is and nice. And we think to ourselves, okay, what is nice doing? Well, nice is describing Bill, the subject of the sentence. So we're going to call that guy a subject complement. And what about is? We know that that's appearing in the present tense. Aha. It's appearing in a tense. So what does that mean? That means that we have a verb there. So when you have the structure of the sentence, basically it will always be comprised of subject and verb phrase. The verb phrase in turn is comprised of the verb group, which includes all of the verbs in the sentence, plus the complements of the verb that we're going to talk about in a minute. So how could you have more than one verb in a verb group? You could have that if you have any auxiliary verbs. So for example, if you have the sentence, I will be going to the movies. I will be going to the movies. Who is this sentence about? The sentence is about me, it's about I, so this is the subject of the sentence. And what are we saying about the subject of the sentence? We're saying that this individual will be going to the movies. We're providing that information about the subject of the sentence. So will be going to the movies is the predicate of the sentence. All of this material is the predicate. All right, what is the predicate going to be made up of? What two parts? Crucially are going to be the verb group, which is main verb plus all of the auxiliary verbs, and the complements of the verb. So let's look at that. If we looked at this predicate, we'll be going to the movies, and we said, okay, what is the main verb here? Notice that the main verb will always, always, always be the last verb within the verb group. In other words, if you have a sequence of verbs, will be going, has been swimming, etc. So you have multiple verbs occurring together. It's always the last one, which is the main verb. And that will always and forever be the case in English. So we see that going here must be the main verb. It's occurring in the last position within the verb group. What about be and what about will? These are not verbs that can occur by themselves. So these are what we call auxiliary verbs. And remember, we label them distinctly from main verbs when we were talking about syntactic categories, and you might have thought to yourself, well, why should we call auxiliary verbs something different from main verbs? They're just a verb, so why not just say all of them are verbs? And what we're going to see is that auxiliary verbs behave very differently than main verbs. In other words, there are different generalizations that we can make about what it is that you can do with an auxiliary verb versus what it is that you can do with a main verb. So if you have an auxiliary verb, you can move it to the front of the question, to the front of the sentence to ask a question. So if you say, Mary might leave tomorrow, you could move might to the front. Might Mary leave tomorrow? Bill is swimming today. Is Bill swimming today? So those auxiliary verbs are able to be moved to the front to form a question. But if you try to move the main verb, Bill is swimming today. Swimming, Bill is today? That just sounds like a really, really weird sentence, right? If somebody said it to you, you would probably try to make the effort to figure out, well, what does that mean? And you try to put the pieces together. So given that you know the meanings of each of the individual words, you would probably arrive at something like what the meaning of the sentence is, but crucially, it doesn't sound like a natural sentence of English. It's not a sentence of English that we would naturally produce or that we would expect someone else to naturally produce. So the idea is that within each predicate, within each verb phrase, you're going to have first your verb group, which is made up of your main verb and all of your auxiliary verbs. Of course, you may have a sentence with no auxiliary verbs, right? You can have a sentence that contains only a main verb. So, John saw the dog. So looking at this sentence, we know the sentence is about John. We know that the subject of the sentence is John, and we observe that, yes, John is a noun phrase. Why? Because it can undergo all of the tests for phrases. It can become, for example, a pronoun. You can say, he saw the dog. Or you can use the WH question test. So you can say, who saw the dog? And you can give as an answer, John. So you know that John is its own independent phrase, and it's what the sentence is about. So looking here at saw the dog, we see that we have our predicate, and we know that our predicate is going to be divided up into our verb group and then all of the complements of the verb. What is our verb group in this sentence? It's only a single word, saw. Just like our subject is a phrase, but it's comprised of a single word, our verb group can also be comprised of a single word. Although we could have said John might have seen the dog, and then the verb group would be might have seen, that whole thing, because we want to include the main verb and all of the verbs that precede the main verbs, all of those helping verbs, the auxiliary verbs. So, and in this case, we have the dog as the complement to the verb. Okay? So, the first and the most common type of verb phrase that you're going to find in English is what we call monotransitive. Monotransitive means exactly the same thing as transitive. It means exactly the same thing. Your text uses the term monotransitive, so that's what I'm always going to say. So monotransitive, this is our first group. Monotransitive verb phrase. A monotransitive verb phrase is made up of two things. It's made up of, first we know, verb group, right? And then we have this idea about complements. What does that mean? Well, in terms of a monotransitive verb phrase, we have the verb group plus the direct object. So, verb group plus the direct object, which we usually write as DO. So this is just an abbreviation for direct object. And notice that the direct object, just like the sentence subject, has to be a noun phrase. It cannot be any other type of phrase. It can only be a noun phrase. So in other words, if you're ever looking at a sentence and you're thinking, okay, I'm not sure if this part of the sentence is the direct object, or maybe it's functioning in another way, maybe it's doing something different, what you can do is always ask yourself, well, okay, do I have a noun phrase there? If your answer is no, you don't have a noun phrase, you have a prepositional phrase, or you have any other type of phrase, then you know for sure that that cannot be a direct object. Okay, so how do we know when we have a direct object? Let's look at an example. So if you say, the lady finished the pizza. The lady finished the pizza. So what's going on here? First thing we want to do is divide the sentence up into subject and predicate. That's the most basic division within every sentence. So our subject here, who the sentence is about, is the lady, right? The topic of the sentence, who we're giving you information about when we say this sentence, is the lady. And then finished the pizza is our predicate. So we have a subject, which is a noun phrase, the lady, and we have a predicate, which is a verb phrase. Why is finish the pizza a verb phrase? Because it's made up of a verb group, which here is just finished. It's just the verb finished. We don't have any auxiliary verbs here, right? So we have finished as our verb group. And then we have this material over here, the pizza. What is going on with the pizza in this sentence? What is the meaning of the phrase the pizza contributing towards the meaning of the whole sentence? So if you think about it, the lady finished the pizza. What does it mean? It means that the lady was engaging in an act of finishing, which we interpret as meaning eating. So the lady finished, and what was the thing that she finished? She finished the pizza. So in other words, the direct object, we can say, receives the action of the verb. The direct object always receives the action of the verb. So you know two things about direct objects. Two things that you know are that they're always and only noun phrases. If you have a preposition hanging around, if you have anything else hanging around, you know you don't have a direct object. And in terms of the meaning, the direct object takes the action of the verb. So that is when we have a monotransitive verb phrase. Monotransitive verb phrase is a verb group plus a direct object only. That's it for that type of sentence. So let's look at a few more examples of that type of verb phrase. If you have a sentence like, Mary ran a marathon. Okay, so Mary ran a marathon. The first thing we want to do is say, what are my two pieces of this sentence? What's my subject? What's my predicate? My subject is going to be Mary, because Mary is who the sentence is about. The sentence is talking about the individual Mary. So we say that this is the subject of the sentence. And this is, as we expect, a noun phrase, because Mary is a noun and is also a noun phrase. Then we have the rest of this material, ran a marathon. So what's going on here, now we have the information about the subject of the sentence. So we've picked out a subject, and now we're providing information about that subject. We're saying that this individual, Mary, that we're picking out, engaged in the action of running a marathon. This is, therefore, the predicate of the sentence. And is, therefore, always a verb phrase. And as soon as we know that we have a verb phrase, we know that we can analyze the verb phrase. Okay, what type of verb phrase do we have? So, looking at this example, we first want to identify what is the verb group. Here, it's just going to be the word ran, because that's the only verb we have in this sentence. You could have had a sentence like, Mary could have run a marathon. and then your verb group would be could have run, that whole sequence. But in the sentence, Mary ran a marathon, the simple past, the only verb you have is just ran. So that's your verb group, and then you look to see what's coming after. What is the thing that she ran? She ran a marathon. So in other words, a marathon receives the action of the verb, therefore making this the direct object of the sentence. So it's a noun phrase that follows the main verb, and it's receiving the action of the main verb. What was the thing that she ran? She ran a marathon. So let's look at a few other examples, because monotransitive verb types are of the most common in English. If you sort of just look at all of the different types of sentences that we use and that we read and that we write in English, you're going to see that most of those sentences are actually monotransitive sentences, so they're extremely, extremely common. So for example, if you have a sentence like, the woman in the other room saw the movie. So the woman in the other room saw the movie. What's going on there? First thing, what's our subject? What's our predicate? The subject seems to be here, the woman, because we're referring to this individual person who we're saying is an adult female. However, when you look at this sentence, the woman in the other room saw the movie, what is this information doing in the other room? It's telling you about the woman. Therefore, it's part of the phrase, the woman in the other room. In other words, the subject of this sentence is all of this information. The woman in the other room. And notice that you could have had even more information. You could have said, the woman in the other room who I haven't spoken with in 5 weeks, who told me that she will be coming to the party, but I'm really doubting that she will, saw the movie. You can go on and on and on and on, and you can have a subject that is as complex as time that you have in the day. If you have 5 hours to say a sentence, you can say a single sentence that will take you 5 hours to say. I don't recommend it. You will never have to do that for this class, but it's really important that you understand the concept that there is no longest sentence. We can always add material to sentences. That's what we were calling the creativity of human language when we were looking at the video from the human language series, the first video. So we've got our subject here, the woman in the other room, and now we're looking at the rest of this sentence and we're saying what's going on here. Saw the movie. This is the predicate of the sentence. Why? Because it's giving us information about the subject of the sentence. And in particular, what is the information? The information is that this individual, the woman who is now in the other room, engaged in the act of seeing something, and the thing that she saw was the movie. So within our predicate, we want to break it down into verb group and complements. And what do we know that we have here for our verb group? Just the single word saw. If we did have a sentence like, the woman in the other room should have seen the movie. Should have seen the movie. What would our verb group be? Should have seen. Because there you would have seen as the main verb, and then should have are functioning as auxiliary verbs. What is happening with the movie? Well, it's the thing that is seen. So it's the item that is taking the action of the verb. In other words, it is the direct object. And just to check that this is possibly a direct object, we could say, okay, let's make sure that this is a noun phrase, right? Because if it's not a noun phrase, it cannot be an object. And we see that the movie is a noun phrase. It's comprised of the determiner the plus the noun movie, and the determiner the is giving you information about movie. So together, we have a verb group comprised of just the word saw plus the direct object comprised of the movie. These two together form the verb phrase of the sentence, the predicate of the sentence. And then all this stuff up at the front, the woman in the other room, is the subject of the sentence. For now, we're just leaving that behind. We're not going to worry about that. We're not going to think about how we're going to divide up this subject into its different component parts. We will come back to that. The only thing we're concerned with now is what is going on within the predicate of the sentence. So the predicate of the sentence being the verb phrase of the sentence that is necessarily comprised of the verb group, which is comprised of the main verb plus all of the auxiliary verbs and any complements to the verb. So for example, what is a complement to a verb? A complement to a verb is a direct object. And if you have a direct object within your sentence, you're going to have a subject, a main verb, and a direct object. You will have, therefore, a monotransitive verb phrase. So what does it mean to have a monotransitive verb phrase? It means that you have a verb group plus a direct object. Let's look at one more example. So if you say something like, she read the novel. She read the novel. So who is it that we're talking about, or what is it that we're talking about in this sentence? We're talking about she. Now, if I come up to you out of the blue and I say, oh, you know, she was reading the novel, you're just going to look at me like, well, what's going on there? Because I don't know who she is, unless we've been having some conversation about a person who we both know that we're going to refer to as she. It's a really weird thing to just come up to someone out of the blue and say, she read the novel. That doesn't work. So when we have a pronoun like she, he, they, we need to know who the referent of the pronoun is. Who is this she? Who is this they? And that's the only way in which it makes sense to use a pronoun in a sentence. So we see that. What is the subject about? It is about she, whoever she is. We don't know who she is. Maybe she's Mary, maybe she's Paula, maybe she's Francine, etc. We don't care. We just care that this is the subject of the sentence. And therefore, the rest of the sentence, read the novel, is going to be the predicate. And given that this is the predicate, we know that it's going to be comprised of two things. A verb group, which is going to be, in this example, just the verb read. So why? Just the verb read is the only verb that we have in this sentence. We see that read in this sentence is in the present tense form. So we say, past tense form. So she read the novel. What does it mean about when the reading took place? It means that it took place in the past with respect to the time at which you say she read the novel, right? So although there's no marker at the end, there's no ed here, as there would usually be for past tense form, we know that we interpret this sentence as meaning that read takes place in the past. So this is a past tense form of this guy. Therefore, this guy must be a verb. And that is the only verb in this particular sentence. And then we have the novel. What's going on here? Well, the novel is the thing that is read. The novel is the thing that gets read. Therefore, the novel is the direct object in the sentence. And we can check to see if that's possible by saying, okay, if it's a direct object, it must be a noun phrase. And when we have the novel, we can see that that's comprised of a determiner, the, plus the noun novel. The determiner is modifying novel, and together they're forming a noun phrase. So yes, this is a noun phrase. It's functioning semantically as the direct object because it receives the action of the verb. It is the thing that is read. Okay, so when we come back, we're going to talk about examples of other types of verb phrase structures. Keep in mind that the verb phrase type of monotransitive is really, really, really common. When you are reading the paper, when you are having conversations, when you're listening to someone, think about what type of sentence is it that that person is using. And you're going to see that quite frequently the answer that you get is going to be monotransitive. So tomorrow, don't tell the person that you're doing this, because if you tell the person that you're doing this, that you're doing some sort of linguistic experiment with them, they're gonna start saying all sorts of weird things that they would never say. So never tell someone when you're doing a linguistics experiment with them. But, when you're in the course of conversation with someone for about 5-10 minutes, try to pay attention to all of the sentences that person says and try to think to yourself, okay, what is the structure of that sentence? And as you do that, you're going to build up many, many instances of monotransitive verb phrases. So, we, however, have other types of verb phrases, which we will talk about in a minute.